You're listening to 17 Carat K-Pop, the podcast that's a little bit of everything with a K-pop twist. From pop culture critiques to the history of K-pop to interviews with people in the K-pop industry and K-pop artists themselves, to concert and album reviews, to a deep dive into the discographies of different K-pop artists, to K-pop news updates, to stories about the music industry more broadly. This show tries to cover everything about K-pop and K-pop as it applies to the larger music and concert scenes. Visit 17caratkpop.weebly.com for more information about the show. That's 17caratkpop.weebly.com. Hello everybody and welcome back to 17 Carat K-Pop. Today we are continuing our BTStudy guide series of episodes with Black Swan, as well as a few other stories that have a lot in common with it. I'm going to connect all these stories and look at the psychological and social messages being sent through these movies, plays, etc., and continuously tie it back to what BTS is always singing about, and of course what they're talking about in the song Black Swan. Other Map of the Soul 7 era work further solidifies my points. So let's break down some media content BTS Army style once again. Please keep in mind that Black Swan is rated R for a reason, so as I talk about this movie, I will just be referencing, though, just a trigger warning, some instances a bit I will have to just allude to. I'll try to be kind of vague about it, but about instances involving sexual harassment, as well as violence, physical fights, lots of super intense stuff, because this whole movie is about this psychological breakdown. To better understand this story and its context, it helps first to know a little bit about the director. Darren Aronofsky has quite the niche interest in his work. His films often are psychological horror-based, like The Wrestler, which he has overtly said is meant to be like a companion film to Black Swan. Both of those movies were filmed on handheld cameras to add to the sense of uneasiness you're supposed to get watching this psychological horror play out. Similarly, he's worked on films like Pi from 1998. That movie is about a man who is on this endless quest for answers in these math problems and just cannot rest easy not knowing the answer to a math problem. And so, spoiler alert, at the end of that movie, he actually is asked again a math problem, and for the first time he is very content not knowing the answer. And so ironically, that was his answer for how to better live his life and feel just a sense of relief that he had probably been seeking. And it's ultimately a story of perfectionism never satisfying you, and that true satisfaction comes from sometimes giving up. But it took a long psychological journey for him to get to that point. Aronofsky has also contrasted his films Black Swan and The Wrestler. You have a movie about a sport that is considered lowbrow by comparison and viewed as just aggressive and angsty, and people are shamed if they're not muscular enough or tough enough to handle it. It's all about this sense of physical prowess and appearance really matters in the world of wrestling. Contrasting that with Black Swan is interesting because ballet is considered the most maybe elitist, highbrow, might be the best way to describe it, sport out there. Basically, it's viewed culturally as the opposite of wrestling. The ideal body type in ballet is obviously meant to be the opposite, and there's this pressure to be very graceful and look like your moves are just effortless and subconscious more so than intentional. And you're supposed to look like the opposite of someone aggressive. But it is at the end of the day about strength, so both are about toughness and strength and resilience, the need for athleticism at an extreme level, and both have these issues with body image and perfectionist standards for their athletes. It's interesting because Aronofsky said, quote, "Dancers are always looking at themselves, so their relationship with their reflection is a huge part of who they are," unquote. Which is a really interesting thing to point out, is that if you're a dance practice, you've got a mirror that makes up a whole wall of your practice room that you're practically living in if you're a professional. That can really distort your sense of self and what you see as needing the most value and scrutiny and all of that. At the end of the day, those stories are so different, but also so similar about this quest for perfection that leads to psychological breakdowns in his characters in movie after movie. In Black Swan, our main character is Nina. She's 28 but acts a lot younger. She has a childish bedroom, lives in a little apartment with her mom who is super overprotective and overbearing, because her mom was actually Nina's age 28, when she got pregnant and left her pro-dancer dreams behind her. and so she's living vicariously through Nina. Her mom is definitely not doing well mentally and really keeps Nina in this state of arrested development. And in a disturbing twist, her mom actually has a lot of portraits of Nina in her bedroom. Just paintings of Nina's face, and they're ugly paintings. They're distorted paintings. And later on, during one of Nina's hallucinations, those paintings are screaming at her. So they have a very unhealthy relationship with each other, clearly, with her mom babying her and Nina feeling like she needs to be babied. This toxic dynamic is on full display from the very beginning, where right at the beginning of the movie, Nina has a nightmare and has to go tell her mom about it. So very reminiscent of a little kid going to tell a parent when they have a bad dream. Things like that keep happening throughout the movie that make you think that sounds like the kind of thing a little kid would do. And that's exactly the point. Thomas is the ballet director who is super, super controlling and uptight. He is directing this production of Swan Lake. He is so cocky. And he bosses people around, and he's very controlling. And then things get worse because he has this habit of really taking advantage of female dancers. He also compares them and verbally abuses them and compares them to each other in unhealthy ways. He contributes to a lot of negative self-talk by, for example, always comparing Nina to Lily, who she views as an enemy for threatening her place in the ballet show. In an indirect way, Thomas keeps saying, "Why can't you be more like Lily?" pointing out the ways that she is having this effortless grace during her performance, and Nina is a try-hard, is how he puts it. And he's just very, very, very coercive, is fostering a really toxic, competitive environment. He's very demanding and knows that he can prey on vulnerable people like Nina, who have this arrested development. Lily, Mila Kunis's character in the movie, is the ballerina Nina feels threatened by. Nina basically tries to take after her and copy her performance that is more effortless and less forced. And part of the psyche of Nina is reminding the viewers all the time that part of the reason why her performance is so forced is because she feels that pressure and she can't just let go and lose herself in the music, which would be part of the perfection of the performance too, if she was just able to grow up on her own time. Lily is otherwise, aside from the dancing, also contrasted to Nina because she is bold, she's mature, she is very confident, everything that Nina would love to be but isn't. Nina actually ends up flopping her Swan Lake audition because she is so preoccupied with thoughts of jealousy and not measuring up to Lily's standards after Lily auditions for the role. But Nina still somehow, despite the botched audition, gets the role she wanted anyway, and we will get to that in a minute. Then there's Beth, Winona Ryder's character in this. She's the dancer who preceded Nina, and so that's why there are now these impromptu new auditions for the Black Swan, because Beth left the company abruptly. In a very revealing exchange, Nina at one point tells Beth, "I just wanted to be perfect like you," and Beth replies, "I'm not perfect, I'm nothing." And this is a repeated theme throughout the movie, where Nina is saying that she idolizes someone she views as a perfect dancer in the company, and they have this look or response of, "What are you talking about?" They don't see that. The story begins with Nina having that bad dream and waking up to tell her mom about it. And right away, her sense of having dual selves is reflected in this story because her reflection is seen in the bus window partly. She sees someone on the subway who looks exactly like her, and then it turns out it was all in her head. So right from the get-go, you get the gist of what this movie's going to be about. It's going to be about Nina's toxic relationship with her mom and her need to grow up, her quest for perfection, especially in ballet, and her success in the audition, and her mental state, her hallucinations, and what is all in her head versus what is actually happening. So Beth leaves the company, and it's time for these auditions for her replacement. Nina auditions for her former role, but the thing about this show is that if you play the Black Swan, you also are playing the role of the White Swan, literally in this show. It's like an evil twin concept. You have to play both characters. And so Nina's problem is that, not that she's a bad dancer, but that she nails the role of the White Swan and cannot nail the role of the Black Swan, which would tank her audition. So she does a just fine performance as the White Swan, but Thomas keeps telling her, "Look, I just can't see you as Black Swan material." Nina has a really hard time tapping into that darker, more mature, rebellious side of herself that is needed to bring that character to life, partly due to just her lack of emotional maturity. She simply cannot fill the shoes of the main character. If she can't portray both sides of that character, then the whole plot of the story falls apart. He views her as White Swan material because she has that innocence in her, that childlike nature. She can play that role, but she can't tap into her darker side enough to authentically pull off a performance as the Black Swan. He also says this Black Swan character has broken freer of a shell that a kid might be able to break out of. In other words, a kid is too naive yet to fully break out of that first world they lived in, kind of harkening back to the Damien concept we talked about. A kid needs to destroy their original world to enter the new world as a full-fledged individual. So you can't tap into that new side of yourself until you grow up a bit, and only then can you lose yourself fully in a passionate performance. And Nina doesn't have the emotional capacity to let down that guard yet. There's a really revealing piece of dialogue here where Nina says she just wants to be perfect, and Thomas replies, quote, "Perfection is not just about control, it's also about letting go. Surprise yourself so you can surprise the audience. Transcendence. And very few have it in them." But like I said before, Nina's botched audition doesn't seem to matter, and she gets the part. Very notable is that this happened after she had an encounter with Thomas where she put on red lipstick in a sheer shirt and decided she could prove to him she can act adult. And that is one of many encounters throughout the movie showing that Thomas really coerces her into kissing him and doing more with him. Thomas hosts this Goodbye Beth party, and at that party, Nina hallucinates that she had this injury, and then later that night when she goes home and fights with her mom, she gets the injury in the real world. It was almost a bad premonition of sorts. After that party, Beth gets hit by a car, and when Nina finds out the next day that Beth had been hit by a car after the party, she goes to visit her in the hospital. And so in one part, when Nina had envisioned herself with a leg injury, she then realizes that Beth actually got the leg injury after being hit by a car. As opening night draws nearer, Nina's hallucinations grow more and more frequent and intense and, just very intense and graphic. And Thomas keeps upping the pressure on her to let go more. He keeps verbally abusing her and keeps manipulating her, forcing her to induce passion, learn how to induce passion romantically. Nina and Erica, her mom, are in this intense feud in their apartment when Lily shows up to apologize for something, and the two of them go out to dinner together to patch things up. When out to dinner, Lily ends up putting ecstasy in Nina's drink, and the viewers are left to interpret why. Was it genuinely, like she said, because Nina's gotta lighten up and she's just trying to help her? Or is it to get her in an intoxicated headspace before the show, which may threaten and sabotage her performing ability? Because Lily has become Nina's understudy for the show. While on the dance floor, Nina actually does kind of lose herself in the music for the very first time, in part thanks to that drug. Then Nina has a hallucination where her and Lily are making out, and Lily's back tattoo turns into the image of black swan wings. Nina also hallucinates that Lily and Thomas end up making out at one point. So overall, she keeps visualizing these paranoid situations where Lily is taking her spotlight, taking over her perceived relationship, her perceived winning starring role in the ballet. She is just being replaced, and that keeps leading to these delusions. She has this moment where she is just losing it, and she feels like such a child in contrast to Lily, and she smashes all of her childhood belongings and everything in her childlike bedroom in a fit of rage. That is when she starts hearing the paintings of herself in her mom's bedroom yelling at her, and so she destroys those paintings, gets into an intense physical fight with her mom. And there are more and more frequently over time scenes where the viewers don't know for sure and have to figure it out for themselves if it's a hallucination or if what is happening to Nina is actually happening in real life. But the scenes of Lily and Thomas being intimate, scenes where Nina is actually stabbing Beth, scenes where you see Nina with injuries, Nina seeing her feet turned into webbed feet. There's just so much going on, and the visuals speak louder than my description ever could. So the last big dramatic scene of the movie is when the big night is here, and Nina is in her dressing room. She has another incident, and she breaks a mirror in the dressing room. She takes a glass shard from the mirror, and then it's unclear what happens and what's a hallucination and what really happened. Some think she really stabbed Lily, with the glass shard, others think she stabbed herself. Nina goes on stage and delivers the knockout performance she's wanted to this whole movie. Then she realizes after she finishes that she is stabbed with the shard. She was the one who's bleeding. Thomas rushes out on stage to be like, "What did you do?" And Nina says, "I did it. I felt it. Perfect. It was perfect." She's just so pleased. So pleased, because at the end of the day, she finally nailed the perfect performance. Doesn't matter the cost. Then the screen fades to black, and that is the end of the movie. There's a lot to unpack here. Let's start by looking at some of the symbols. There's the black swan symbol in general, which is meant to signify some sort of need to reclaim personal power and a sense of ability to mature. And it's about discovering and then learning how to live with that black swan in all of us and coming to terms with it through growing up and maturing. And knowing that you'll forever be tied to your shadows, to that more rebellious dark side, and reconciling that dark side with the light side. It's no coincidence that these are themes we've been talking about in the other BT Study Guide episodes that are recurring throughout BTS's cinematic and literary sources of inspiration, this concept of coming to terms with a duality within yourself, and making peace with those different components rather than try to isolate them. Then there's of course the frequent bird symbolism in general, of just wanting to spread your wings and fly. We've already talked at length in the Damien episode about BTS's use of the bird symbol in their work. What's not necessarily a symbol, but is very interesting and worth noting, is that Thomas calls Nina, when he rushes on stage to be like, "What have you done to yourself?" he calls her Little Princess. And this is the one and only time he calls Nina Little Princess. Before, he was just, remember, very, very verbally abusive to her. It's just a really interesting moment. He finally is complimenting her and looking concerned, but at this point it is too late. And now, despite the cost to her well-being, physically and mentally, he's giving her a compliment only after she delivered him a perfect performance. Now let's recap some key details from BTS music videos that show Black Swan in a new light, and vice versa. First of all, Nina's face is cracked on the movie posters, just like Jin's face cracks at the end of the Blood, Sweat, and Tears video. There's also that evil twin concept in a way that Lily plays the role of sometimes, and Jin kisses his reflection during that Wings tour trailer, so he's alluding to an evil twin is a conclusion you could draw. There's the wing imagery. Of course, Jimin grows black wings in the video for the song Black Swan from BTS. V's character also grows black wings and has cuts on his back at one point, just like Nina did. Although, of course, then it was thought that maybe that was actually just a hallucinated injury, because you see her in the mirror later and there's no cut on her back, so that's another room for debate. In the video for I Need You from BTS, Jungkook gets hit by a car, just like Beth did. Nina falls onto a mattress at one point, just like V before he is helped up by RM in that super pivotal moment. Jimin has those scenes in the bathtub, which reminded me of the blood in the bathtub's hallucination scenes in Black Swan. And V's character at some points does get violent with that glass bottle. Two BTS songs in particular look extra significant in hindsight: Shadow and Ego. In Shadow, Suga sings about being fearful of it being lonely at the top, and he raps about vertigo and loneliness, and it's about, the brighter your light, also the bigger your shadow that you have to reconcile with. And with those highs and attaining more achievements in life comes enhanced downsides as well, and you can't escape from that. He names his shadow Hesitation in the song, like his shadow is called Hesitation, like he's fearful of meeting that new side of himself. Rather than just ignore the shadow, he has to face it, and he gets that. There's, of course, the breaking glass imagery that reminded me of the breaking glass mirror in the Black Swan movie. He references a growing shadow swallowing him, and the dancer hands on him represent the shadow that is following him. There are just so many references to shadows, which obviously carries a lot of symbolism here, because your shadow is like the black and white swan duality. Ego is sort of the partner song to Shadow as I see it, because I think they were on the same album for a reason. They are dealing with those two sides of you, the brighter, more confident side with your ego, and then the shadow. And we see that because there is literally a shadow and a bright light in the Ego video. There's also the hospital scene, which made me think of the time Beth was there after that car accident scene. Then we see a baby picture of J-Hope, and that made me think of everything about Nina in Black Swan, and how she is struggling to leave that younger self behind and just grow up, and has to stop and celebrate and actually learn to like growing up. She needs to see it as not scary but freeing. And lastly, of course, there's the BTS song that's literally called Black Swan, and the video and the lyrics are all about that fear. They reference the quote, "A dancer dies twice, once when they stop dancing, and the first death is more painful." Meaning that truly what makes life worth living to these performers is dance, or whatever their passion is. And so the song Black Swan by BTS is all about the fear of what happens if you don't have that passion anymore, if that has left you, if you're not loving it anymore. That's like your first death out of two, and that first one, when you lose that spark in you, is more painful to deal with. That's why Suga in Shadow is saying, "Don't let me shine, don't let me fly," because he's fearful what happens when he stops flying or stops shining. There are several major takeaways I have that are from both BTS's songs related to this and Black Swan. Major themes they have in common. The first one is the show must go on attitude, literally even if it kills you, and that vice that is perfectionism, that unattainable quest for the perfect performance. Always nitpicking what you do to try to be better and never being satisfied, which ties into the larger theme of the fear and the problems that come with your entire identity being wrapped around one thing, especially if that one thing is your job. If you are defined solely as a dancer, and you don't make it as a dancer, then who are you anymore? And this doesn't apply to just athletes. If your entire identity and your entire sense of worth comes from your job, or one singular hobby, you're in trouble. You've got to expand your focus, or you may spiral into this never-ending quest to be perfect at the one thing you think you're good at. There are a lot of interesting studies actually on dance psychology, and I will link to a few that I've read on my weekly newsletter for more reading if you're into this stuff. Basically saying that performance anxiety and in general mental health issues in dancers and in any athlete comes from this need for control, this sense that, well, this is the main defining trait of me is good dancer, so if I'm not good, what am I? In the sense of needing to then control how perfect you are as a performer to still achieve that sense of self and confidence. That fear of facing yourself outside of your defining trait or career or whatever. There was this study done by the Department of Performing Arts and English at University of Bedfordshire, which emphasized the importance of mental health care in dancers because this job especially is really important because the odd hours make a work-life balance hard with this kind of career. And there's also the job instability that comes with performing live shows. And then, of course, there's the physical demands of the job. So you have to constantly reconcile what level of physical demand and training for your job is actually warranted versus how much you're unnecessarily pushing yourself. Because you do need to build up stamina for ballet and things like that. This study showed that this 9-week mental skills intervention program, as they called it, led to increased confidence and self-awareness in the dancers interviewed for this project. The conclusion was, quote, "Independent dancers are passionate, highly motivated, and committed individuals whose love of dance and the opportunities it offers for growth and fulfillment are sufficient to overcome the numerous hardships associated with an independent career. The extent to which such hardships are perceived or experienced as advantages and are overcome successfully may depend on dancers' psychological characteristics. The adoption of an optimistic outlook, the use of relevant mental skills, and the amount of social support and financial stability available to them. Furthermore, while factors such as psychological characteristics, mental skills, social support, and career management skills are critical elements of talent development, they also play a crucial role in ongoing career development. Really pay attention to that last part. Critical for talent development, yes, but especially for ongoing career development. They're not going to perform their best and actually get better unless they take care of their mental health along the way. The bigger picture was emphasized in a separate study by the Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology, which talked about the needs theory, aka the self-determination theory, which basically describes humans as intuitively being motivated and goal-setting. We naturally gravitate towards becoming better people, towards growing, towards challenging ourselves and rising to the occasion. Humans are a lot more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. There are 3 main parts of this self-determination theory that involve your instincts. There's feeling like you've done a job well done, that's competence. There's feeling like you have control over what you're doing, that's autonomy. And then there's relatedness, the need to connect with others. Competence, autonomy, relatedness. Job well done, having control in your life, and connecting with others. Don't those themes remind you of what we've been talking about this whole time through this series, BTS's core values in their music videos? Self-improvement, self-love, independence and confidence building while still strengthening and seeing the benefits and importance of teamwork, friendship, and relationships overall on your own, and learning to love others in the same process. All going with the self-determination theory that humans naturally want to be better people and then be better people in groups as well, which is what BTS is all about. All to say, this performance anxiety in performers and this quest for perfection comes from the needs theory. And this movie and BTS's songs actually just deal with what to do with that, because that can be very good and important. It's not like don't have the needs theory apply to you. Of course, strive for better. But when should you draw that line and accept enough is enough and don't push yourself too hard? So there are some main themes here, one being how the show must go on at all costs. Then there's the related theme of the fear of being replaced, that competitiveness, especially in a highly competitive world like professional ballet, and in general the sense that musicians must get all the time, that fear that they have a few big years in the spotlight and then what happens after that? How hard do you fall after you go so high? Third main theme in Black Swan seems to be that we are all our own worst enemies, because remember in several conversations talking about perfection, other characters in the story are like, no, I'm not, I'm nowhere near perfect, why would you think that? Just showing that everyone is their own worst critic and sees each other better than we see ourselves. 4, the big theme of literally having to face yourself, reckon with dark sides, and face your dark side and come to terms with it as just part of you, not something to cast away and successfully be able to cast away. What Black Swan is based on, which is the original story of Swan Lake. There is this prince who falls in love with Odette, but Odette has been cursed by the evil sorcerer named Baron von Rothbart, which is the classic evil sorcerer name, the most evil sorcerer name I've ever heard for a character. The evil sorcerer Rothbart sentences Odette to a life as a swan, except for a few hours of the day when she's allowed to turn back into a human. I don't know how it works. But anyway, when she turns into a human, that is when the prince sees her and it's love at first sight. Then he realizes he can be the one to break the spell, because all that is needed to free Odette's soul from the swan most of the day, to break this curse, she just needs someone who's never professed love to anyone before, nor ever will again, to devote their love to her. The prince is like, alright, I'll proclaim my love to you, and then we can be free and live happily ever after together. Rothbard, of course, has other plans, and so he sends his evil daughter, Odile. So Odile turns into an Odette lookalike, and the prince accidentally professes his love to the evil stepdaughter. The prince is super transparent at least, and says, hey Odette, I messed up big time. I committed to the wrong girl. And she accepts his apology. I don't know if I would, but she does. But it's too late to turn back the clock on the decision, so they can never be together. So they decide to just drown themselves in the lake and die together. Very Romeo and Juliet-esque. In some alternative versions of this story, the prince just drowns himself. But Odette at least is free from Rothbart because her soul gets released out of the swan, so there's that, I guess. Rather than have a tragic, dramatic love story, in the Barbie version, it ends where Rothbart's evil goes away thanks to some magic crystal's powers. They live happily ever after, all is well in the world, Barbie gets her Ken. And actually you find out at the very tail end, this was just all a story Barbie was telling her little sister Kelly. Somehow Barbie made the connection between, because at the beginning of the movie she tells Kelly, oh, what's wrong? And Kelly's like, I'm a little scared to go to sleepaway camp. And so Barbie tells her this story that's supposed to be a fable, I guess, to make her feel better and more comfortable taking that risk. And then she tells the story of Swan Lake. I don't know how she made the connection. But anyway, they had to leave a moral lesson in there. So the whole thing is her giving her sister that piece of advice using the most elaborate extra analogy you can imagine. The point is, no matter what version of the story we're talking about and what ending it had, this is a story about sabotage, about feeling threatened by someone taking your place, about competitiveness, and about what you would give up for love, basically. Very much like Nina feels like Lily is replacing her, like Odile took the role from Odette. Ties into the larger fears about what happens if people forget about me, and my passion for this, and my ability to shine here. Don't let me shine, because one day it'll die out. The second interesting and unexpectedly graphic story, in a way, is the Red Shoes. This is a story from 1948. It's a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, so of course it's super extra and unnecessarily gruesome to get its point across. Things escalate very quickly in these stories. The main character is this girl named Karen who is living in poverty with her mom. Her mom dies and then she gets taken in by a wealthy woman who lets her live this lavish lifestyle that she's never had before, but she becomes very used to it and entitled. So her standards change, and the worn-down red shoes she owns will not suffice for her anymore. So she asks her new rich mom if she will go buy her a brand new pair of these red shoes. Her mom says, fine, but don't you dare wear these to church. You wear black formal shoes to church. Karen doesn't listen and can't resist wearing the new red shoes to church. And that act of disobedience will haunt her for the rest of her life and afterlife. Because those red shoes can't stop dancing now, so they literally push and pull Karen around because they have a mind of her own now, and she doesn't even go to her mom's funeral because the shoes are distracting her so much and pulling her away. She tries to just go back to church, but the shoes won't let her, and they keep blocking her way, blocking her ability to enter the church. So, in a dark twist, she decides to go to the executioner and just have her feet chopped off with the shoes, which she does in classic Hans Christian Andersen style. The shoes keep dancing. They still have a life of their own. They're still dancing even though she's separated from them, and continue to block her way when she tries to go to church. So, in another dark twist, Karen basically prays for peace from this madness, and it's granted to her. The angel appears, says, "Your wish is my command," and takes her soul up to heaven with them. If you are a longtime K-pop fan, you might remember I used music video for the song The Red Shoes. There's no feet executions or anything in IU's video. It's very safe to watch if you're squeamish. But she does have these runaway red shoes who have a mind of their own and continuously sway her out, because in that video she has this black and white world and then one full of color. And the shoes will let her stay in the fun, colorful world, but only for a while. And then they keep pulling her back after that short burst of happiness. Then she's back to the black and white world. So the story is about karma, it's about temptation. It's also a good story about don't forget your humble beginnings, because this girl just got taken in by the fact she had all this money suddenly. Didn't need to become so materialistic. It also shows in a way the importance of just rest from anything that humans can do that these inanimate objects cannot. A reminder that you are severable from the inanimate objects, from the things that are machines that can go all day, and humans should not be cogs in the machine. That's another way I would interpret it, because the shoes are never tired, the shoes never get bored of this. So the Red Shoes, Black Swan, Swan Lake, BTS's work, here's the bottom line that ties all of these stories together. Going off of the same theme from the past few BTStudy Guides episodes, this is getting at the inherent gray area life is full of, the inherent complex messiness of life. Because yes, BTS preaches about loving yourself, and they stress the importance of not letting that ego get in the way of other things that could come into your life. Yes, they preach doing your best, and they criticize a system that pressures to go too far on the quest for perfection. Yes, they encourage healthy relationships with others, and they criticize putting too much of yourself hidden away to just stay in the relationship. They promote growing and maturing, but they also promote not letting go of your inner child and not growing up entirely. That complex, nuanced messiness of life is what BTS's stories are all about. They are so layered, and they may have seemingly contradictory messages. That's the point. That's what makes their messages resonate more than other artists' messages do, because they are so real, and they aren't taking an issue and preaching it in a very singular way. They preach things in a universal way by including all of these different details and nuances that come with talking about certain deep, layered topics. They found a way to communicate their messages with the detail that is deserved for them to be real, meaningful conversations, but still in a way that is accessible to people who don't want to be just preached at. In a very broad sense, at the end of the day, all of these stories are about finding yourself. Despite obstacles, despite distractions, it's all about finding who you are and then accepting yourself as you are through embracing your passions while knowing where to draw the line between a passion and an obsession. Remember that key Black Swan dialogue at the beginning of this episode I mentioned about how I know Thomas is an awful character in the story, but this one thing I will give him credit for, which is pointing out how perfection isn't just about control, it's also about your ability to let go of control. Your ability to lose yourself in music or whatever you're doing. That inner spark, that passion that burns within you cannot truly burn its brightest if you don't just let go and let some things happen. And just make sure that your love for what you're doing wins out at the end of the day. I think what resonates and why I've spent so much time on this episode and these stories is because I personally was aspiring to be a pro dancer at one point. I was taking a lot of dance classes and I had to really step back and think about why, because it was just going through the motions then. It was just my life. And so I had to really step back and realize where to draw the line. And that's where the messiness of life comes in, because my solution was not just to be like, I'm never going to dance again. And it wasn't also the other extreme of just keep doing this, it'll be worth it in the long run. It was about figuring out where to draw that line between, wait, am I doing this because I truly love to do it? Or am I doing this because I feel like I have to do it? Am I doing this because it truly is still giving me joy? Or am I doing this because I fear that if I don't do it, I don't know what to do with myself? And I don't know where my career will go and if I have a backup plan, what that would look like. Am I doing this for a certain definition of success? And do I even define success that way anymore? Do I want to go down that path in life? Decisions that are easier said than done. So Nina is like, do I keep fulfilling my mother's dreams for me, or do I let her keep yelling at me at home? And she does have a genuine passion for what she's doing, so then it's easier to have people like Thomas manipulate her into continuing to do it more and more and more and strive for more and more and more perfection, because there is some genuine passion still in there. Nina does love to dance. She's not just robotically doing this. It's just gone too far, and that's what this is about, figuring out when it's gone too far and stepping back from that. Same with Karen in the Red Shoe story. She does love to dance. It's just that she didn't know how to stop when it was appropriate to stop. It's a little bit different, but basically at the end of the day, Black Swan is about fearing what will happen if you stop, playing your role. Who will fill your shoes, and will you ever get to fill those shoes again if someone replaces you? Will your time have come and gone if you give up an opportunity? Remember, at the end of the movie, Nina does reach that state of transcendence that Thomas described as so rare to come to dancers, but she finally reaches that. She thinks it was the best performance of her life, and so nothing else matters in that moment. And she's just beaming. It was perfect. She's laying dying on the stage, but she's like, you know what? I'm just thinking about how perfect that performance was. You can get what you wanted, but at what cost? And then what? It's not like she has time to revel in her joy and her job well done. She's dying. So she doesn't have any time to celebrate. Why would she strive for that? The irony just shows the messiness and weirdness of life. Losing yourself is a key step to finding yourself. Losing yourself in a performance will lead you to find yourself. I will leave you in thought about that. That is all for today's discussion. Thank you all for listening to my thoughts and theories today, and I will talk to you all again very soon.